welcome to our Sunday sermon. I have the pleasure to announce our host today is Captain Adam Knight, Kootenai Fire. Captain Knight has some experience in what we're going to go over today, and we invited him because his story is really good and we need people to understand that there's help available. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know at the beginning of this, I'm having some technical difficulties trying to get some information. We did send an email out on a list of help, but I want everyone to know if you need some help during this or after, go ahead and send an email to coifools@gmail.com. If you need anything, we're going to try to get that list up during this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and send this over to Adam. And again, Adam, thanks for sharing your story today. We appreciate having you and appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you.
Sure. So a while back, Steve Jones asked me to share my story. And the premise behind this whole presentation is that it's kind of a story time. It's a presentation I've put together, and I've given it to a lot of smaller fire districts throughout North Idaho. And I've made it specific for each one. And I think we're going to touch on some things that are going to hit your feelers as well. Maybe some calls that you've been on, and dig into some emotions that are not fun to deal with. So the whole thing is about suicidal awareness, suicidal ideation, and just a recognition of what that is. And it doesn't matter if you've experienced that. It may be the guy you're sitting next to in the ambulance or the engine, or it may be someone you're supervising. So we're going to talk about my symptoms and kind of the road that I went down, and I'll bring it forward. I've had suicidal ideation throughout my adult life, and it's something that I ignored, and it's not something I really talked about. And as many of you know, I went to the Center of Excellence in Maryland a couple of years ago, and I became transparent and vulnerable. I became an open book and willing to share my story with those guys that I had just met. So by all means, if it gets too tough, if it gets too boring, if it's not what you expected, I'm not going to be offended if you decide to leave. This Sunday sermon is something that brings me some treatment qualities. It allows me to connect, to resonate with one person, at least one person in this audience, and maybe give you a little bit of perspective of where my head's been and what I've done to make it healthier, so I can function and do well and persevere in life. So we're going to start off with a video. There's actually quite a few videos, and the catch with these is that they're fairly glitchy on your end. I know they are. I've got my phone set up, logged in as my kiddo, and I can see it's glitchy. The message is there. You just have to listen to it and really allow it to paint a picture of what's going on and what the presenter is saying. So just one moment.
Hey, you.
No, that's not it.
Hey, Goodman here. Contact Medic 6161, request you standby in the area. WGSW. Contact 61. Copy, so I have 865 SALS. Medic are confirming 2 code black 3. Dispatch, confirming 2 code black. From the cafeteria, snowpack. 1013 North, snowpack, additional contact, two additional.
It's that kind of job where we don't want to talk about when we're having a tough time. We keep it in. Then we come into our job and we take on more of society's ills and we try and fix it. We've asked these young men and women to do sometimes incredible, amazing, unbelievable things that Hollywood makes movies about. Those big things take a toll. We owe it to them. We owe it to them to do everything we can to help them through these crises.
I've been a firefighter here for a little bit over a year. We go through many calls during the day. Some can be super influential to some people and some can be completely normal for other people. And if we don't treat those differently and treat those people differently and give them the tools to be able to deal with those situations, it's super hard for them to speak up sometimes. A lot of things add up after a while. I mean, if you're going on 10, 15 calls a day, and it can eat away at you, by the end of the day, you end up being a little raw and a little bit less empathetic to people that you're dealing with. And I think sometimes it affects stuff outside of work. I went through something super tragic about 4 or 5 months ago. I lost my son to suicide. And for me, it was super hard for me I thought it was going to be super hard for me to come back to work. We have a critical incident management team, so they are set up to come in and help families. They come in and help the crew. They come in and help families of members of the crew if they have something going on. But they're members of our own fire service, so they're firefighters. They're people that have been through what we're going through. They have an understanding, but they also have some sort of training that gives them the tools to be able to help us in ways that we probably don't know. We'd gone on a call about, it was a shift before everything happened with my son, and we lost a baby to SIDS, and we did CPR all the way to the hospital, and they were here as soon as we got back from that call. There was a phone call in place, and they were going to come stop by and be able to help us out and give us tools to be able to deal with those type of things.
I'm Mike Washington, Seattle Fire Department. I've been a firefighter for 29 years. Well, I've been involved with peer support for a number of years, going back to around the Pang Warehouse fire time and seeing how that was rolled out at the time and how it didn't work for a lot of firefighters and dealing with the aftermath of our line of duty deaths. And I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of making it better. As someone who struggled with suicide as a firefighter, you look at society as a whole, and if we had a group of people here, we know that people as a child have gone through abuses. They had sexual molestation, psychological abuse, economic deprivations, you name it. And I had all those. I had all those as a child. So I joined the Marine Corps, and after the Marine Corps I became a firefighter, and I started seeing the things that we deal with in the fire service. And in the meantime, I'm still in the Marine Corps Reserve, and I'm going to Desert Storm, I'm going to Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, and I'm seeing things there. But I don't talk about them, because if you don't talk about it in the fire service, you don't talk about it in the Marine Corps either. It's that culture, right? That culture that we all wanted to be a part of. Before I even joined the Marine Corps, I had a litany of things. But what we do, we just put that away. It's just, especially at that time, I'm 55 years old, and at that time, you just, okay, we don't talk about it. We're just gonna move on with our lives. And there is something to be said for moving on with your life, but you need help doing it. And then for me, the road to the idea of suicide, this serious road where I am on a bridge, was on June 14th, 2008. I was notified that my son was killed in action in Afghanistan. And I was at Fire Station 16 at the time. And the white Suburban pulled up, and that Marine officer came up and notified me that your son has been killed in action. And if there was the PTSD issues that I was already dealing with, kind of accelerated it, as you can imagine, and things just got harder and harder. And my drinking increased. My marriage was failing, and these are all things that I think I had control over if I would have sought the help at the time, if I felt comfortable enough to reach out to somebody. And sometimes that's just your own thing, And part of what we want to do here in the as a peer support representative is make it okay to reach out. And I'm in that world, and I didn't feel like I could do it. Right. And so my world was spiraling out of control, and that put me literally on the bridge. That put me on a motorcycle going through an intersection with my eyes closed, just seeing what's going to happen on the other end. And then eventually that seeps over into your professional life. You might be able to think you're holding it together, but then you're going to get to that call, that one call that's going to say, you need some help, and you need it now.
So with May being Mental Health Awareness Month, and today being the start of National EMS Week, it's kind of a perfect segue into getting into the topic of today. That last guy we just had was 29 years on the job, and late into his career making risky behaviors and starting to drink. Those in and of themselves are not that big of issues, but they when he's not correctly coping with things going on in his life, that's what leads to the PTSD and the sleepless nights and the risky behaviors and more drinking and not talking to your friends and withdrawing. You become a hot mess fairly fast. So who am I? Again, my name's Adam Knight. I'm a captain with Kootenai County Fire and Rescue. This picture was taken shortly after I was promoted from engineer to lieutenant, roughly 9 years ago or so. I've learned so much from that time in regards to personnel management and ways to deal with certain situations and discipline and changing behavior. It's incredible what you don't know when you're promoted. So the objectives of this whole thing is to share my personal story, to connect with at least one person who my story may resonate with the topics that I described. I've had people comment during the presentation, and I've also had people email, text, or call after the presentation, either seeking information on my resources. Dr. Kristen Kishel, who I think is an incredible resource for us as first responders in the greater Coeur d'Alene, Spokane area to talk to. Um, I I think that I will have that connection with one person, and some people in this audience, this is their second or third time seeing this presentation. So thanks for coming back. So, and then overall, I want to reduce the first responder epidemic we are faced through awareness education. Suicide's not a sexy topic, whatever. It's not firefighter survival. It's not throwing ladders. It's not sexy whatsoever. But it's something that I feel comfortable talking about. And honestly, after I get done with this presentation, I found myself kind of going down into a funk and really using the coping mechanisms that I've learned and I describe. And this is tough stuff. Sometimes I get emotional, and sometimes I'm able to power through it. And and the emotional isn't weakness; it's a reminder of where I've been and how much strength I've exhibited to myself to rise above all that. So this is my bride. This is Jamie. We were wed on July 7th of 2007. Two of my best men that were in the wedding are in the audience today. And I'm a much different person than I was 13 years ago. Throughout this 20-year career, I've been across these United States multiple times to multiple conferences, and oftentimes you go to a class and the instructor really dives into the topic, throwing ladders, hose size, gallons per second, whatever it may be. And for some weird reason, my brain works a little bit differently, but I always wondered, who's behind the scenes, who is supporting this person. And it didn't really matter. It didn't pertain to the subject of the class, but it's always something that I wondered. Well, now you guys know who is supporting me and who is behind the scenes. And it's not just my wife. It's my whole family. I've got 3 kids. My oldest daughter just turned 17. And my son is 10 and my youngest daughter is 7. I really have a great life with being a captain with Kootenai Fire, working the greatest job in the world. I've been really lucky, and I've had a really good crew over the last pretty much my whole career. There's some ones that I've really learned a lot from, and some that are gone that are probably shouldn't be here. Their heart wasn't in it. So, being born and raised in North Idaho, I tried to share some of the values that I was brought up with being in the outdoors and hunting and fishing and recreating. I took this last set off. I'm on green shift, so those guys are just getting on shift, and I took that set off to recreate for my daughter's birthday and get out on the river and enjoy some sun. And I did, and I had a great time. This is my son. He, of all people, is too smart to be a fireman. I think this is a terrific picture, and I really hope he joins the fire service someday. But he's so smart. He doesn't belong in the fire service. I don't know what he's going to do, but he's a really smart kid. And this is Nora. She is really small for her age, and she is so excited to be a paramedic someday, or an EMT, or be in the fire service. It's kind of I don't know. She's a fun kid. And I know all of you that have kids can resonate with how proud you are of your kids and what they mean to you, and what that hug feels like when you get home, or when it feels like when you hug them on your way to work. So this is another part of my family. Some of you guys know my backstory, but essentially I'm living a modern family. This is my ex-wife and her husband, Sean. Sean's a Bonner County paramedic and has been in the fire service nearly as long as I have. And there's a reason why I share their picture, because we are family. we are, I am not my parents, and my parents divorced when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, and it was brutal for a lot of years. It sucked. We share a special bond. This is Katie Ray's 17th birthday party last Thursday. We come together. Sean and Brian love all our kids like they're their own, and it's a special thing that we have. A little bit about Brian and why it pertains to the topic today. Brian started off at Central Dispatch in 2003, 2004, and I hope there's some dispatchers that chime in or watch this later, because this really pertains to you. It pertains to all first responders, between law enforcement, dispatch, fire, EMS. I don't exclude anybody. So Brian was a dispatcher for Central Dispatch for a number of years, and then went to Post Falls Dispatch for a number of years, and then took some time off. And it was they were financially stable enough to quit. And I think what it boiled down to, it was so mentally stressful that she didn't want to handle it anymore. She's a strong enough woman, she could handle it, but it's so unfair when we, as first responders, go into our mental funk and we start distancing ourselves from our family, and we start having attitudes, and we just start acting different than what we used to be. And so Brian is coping well with her career in dispatch. She's got some really notable calls under her belt that are really painful for her to re-experience, such as the Bonner County deputy shooting in Blanchard. I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. She was the dispatcher on that for all the fire EMS, listening to the 911 calls. A lot of times our fire med dispatchers at Central are the call takers, so they're fielding those first 911 calls. She was on duty in July of 2005 when Shasta Groney was found at the Denny's in Coeur d'Alene. That story in and of itself is maybe not that big of a deal, but that's a pretty powerful moment in the history of this area, and she was part of it. And for some people, that may be a really cool thing, and for some people, it's really painful. I'll just tell you right now, I'll say it again in a little bit. The stories that I talk about are my trauma, and anything that happens in your life from childhood to current that has a negative effect is a trauma. Some of the traumas that I've experienced now 15 years ago are just now surfacing. Some of the traumas I had 2 weeks ago surfaced right away. So they're my traumas, and some of the calls that we go on or the phone calls that we field may not have that same effect as your partner. And just keep that in mind throughout your career. So a little bit about my career. Being with Kootenai County Fire has led to a lot of great things in my life. About 10 years ago, we started EMT and fire training, and that's an excellent side job that we cater to, or we have initial certification courses for the EMTs and advanced EMTs, and we do a ton of recertification training for EMTs trying to keep their EMT certs through the state or national registry. So KCFR, if you don't know, we currently have 4 stations. We're a fire-based EMS system, so the county owns our ambulances, and through contracts send funds back to the fire department so we can run our EMS calls. The fire district is 110 square miles, and we serve the greater Post Falls and the areas surrounding the city of Coeur d'Alene. So we have all of Interstate 90 from the Washington state line to milepost 11, 12 in Coeur d'Alene, and then we pick up right around milepost 16 all the way to 4th of July Pass and just a little bit over. We have EMS responsibilities to respond out into the national forest for a myriad of things. It may be a a chainsaw cut, it may be an ATV accident, it may be a chest pain of a huckleberry picker, to the hunter that has fallen off a cliff trying to retrieve an animal. We go to so many things. We're a all hazards mitigation fire department. You never know whether you're going to the Spokane River for a swift water incident at Corbin Park, where kayakers are out without life jackets floating the river. Or you never know when you're going to Silverwood for an outbuilding on fire. It's we have an amazing job where we never know what we're doing 5 minutes from now. That's 6,500 annual call volume, as more than that. Yeah, but we have our slow stations and we have our really busy stations, and we work a 4896 schedule, much like many in the Panhandle of Idaho. So this was my crew a few years ago. This is in support of Kellen's kiddo when he had cancer and was getting treatments in Tennessee. And this brotherhood we have where we support each other is second to none, and very proud to be part of it. I know a lot of you guys are too. So why me? What happened? I'll tell you that my kids are healthy. Aside for some extra big cheeks, I'm healthy. My wife is healthy. We're financially stable. I've got a big ass green lawn that's fairly weed free, and I buy toys when I want. I don't like to boast, but life is pretty good. It's not over the top. We have our boundaries, but what happened? And the truth is that I was fine. And when you talk to someone that may be a little bit down and they say, I'm fine, and you're like, man, something just isn't right. Well, they're really effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Underneath that surface of smiles and joking, there's something wrong. And it's 9 times out of 10, there really is something wrong. And it may take a little one-on-one session to get a little something out of them, or and maybe someone that's outside your department, someone that they can trust, that it gets whatever out of them so they can talk to them. So I was fine in the end, but I really was not, and I knew it. And I knew it for several years, and I really honestly couldn't pinpoint what was going on. I willingly go to work. I like going to work. I willingly go on calls, good or bad, and I participate where I'm needed. But in the, around 2014, 15, 16, things started hitting me a little bit different. I don't know why. I wouldn't know what to call it other than I didn't feel good. I was moody. I was drinking more, and to me, I wasn't drinking more for any other reason than I liked it. I will tell you that there wasn't one 4-day between 2015 and 2018 where I hadn't been drinking, and it's I'm talking drinking a lot, and a lot for me may be different than a lot for somebody else, but I'll share it in a moment. But in September of 2018, I went to the IAFF Center of Excellence. And before I went, I was drinking a 6-pack of Keystone Ice, really gross beer with high alcohol content, 16 ounces. I would drink one of those, a bottle of wine, and a pint of whiskey a night. And the thing with my drinking is that I didn't have hangovers. So there weren't any repercussions of drinking. I didn't care. My wife would ask me to slow down, and I'd oblige and say yes, or say I would, but the truth is that I wouldn't. And I became addicted to alcohol. I'm in recovery right now, and it's called recovery for a reason. I still crave it, I still want it, but there's some coping mechanisms that I go through that allow me to distract myself or not do it. Um, but the picture on the left of the fireman sitting on the side panel of the engine, um, you know, there were a couple of scenes where I felt like this, and I'm going to share my story. Um, we have friends that are not part of the fire service that admire us, that look up to us, and they just can't believe what we are a part of and what we do. And oftentimes they ask us, "Oh, what's the worst call you've been on?" And oftentimes that's the worst question for your friend or fireman. Sometimes it's really bad. Sometimes it's a short answer, dead babies. For whatever reason, I still I hold on to obscure information. I can't really remember what I had for dinner 2 nights ago, but I remember doing CPR on an 8-month-old on December 18th. His name, I remember his name. I remember the look in his mother's eyes when I told him what we were doing, and then finally, what his mother's reaction when I told her that their baby had perished, and we did CPR for 15 minutes, and I just remember the feeling of the cramps in my thumbs as we're pushing on the chest. It's not trying to be dramatic. It's just some of the things that I hold on to that stick with the guy. And um, I'll tell you right now that I feel like I'm coping with them well. We had a really good debriefing after that incident and went through some coping mechanisms. And today I'm doing well with it. That's not to say that something might not come up in 6 years where I remember the feeling of that night, and it drums up some bad things. But I have to have those coping mechanisms in place to work through it. So why me? What happened? Well, trauma, lots of trauma. All these calls as a single incident were really not that big a deal. They were cool. This incident right here did not result in a fatality. This was a train versus a passenger car out on the prairie. And we responded. I remember how we responded. I remember who my officer was. And this incident, I just remember there's so much crap in this car, bags of clothes and garbage, that it essentially cushioned this driver, and it resulted in a bumps and bruises type of injuries. It was really a traumatic incident, but it was a big incident, and it sticks in my mind. Why I have pictures of it, I don't know. I don't know who took them. I don't know. But here's another incident that sticks in my head. It was up on the hillside south of Post Falls. It was a grader operator that either went into cardiac arrest and fell out of a road grader, or he fell out, hit his head, then went into cardiac arrest. It doesn't matter. It was a significant incident. It was a trauma. We did not save him, but it was nonetheless a large incident. This was simply a semi truck east of Coeur d'Alene that wiped out on the Jersey barrier. He was not injured whatsoever, but just that adrenaline rush that you get when you're going to, a semi rollover. You don't know what it is. You don't know who's injured. You don't know what victims you're going to find 50 feet down the hill. You don't know what other vehicles are involved. It's just a large incident that results in a trauma. And when I speak of trauma, I think of the way I've been able to correlate this trauma with being able to cope with it and not is thinking of a stack of Jenga blocks. And you have a tall stack of Jenga blocks when you're born. And every time there's a trauma, whether it's a broken leg or, like I said earlier, the parents' divorce, you lose a block. And as first responders, we lose a lot more blocks because of what we see and what we do. Yes, we signed up for the job, but it just happens to be one more block that comes out. And when you're unable to, or when you have that trauma that sets you over the edge, your Jenga block falls over, your stack falls over, and you don't know what you're going to get, whether it's anxiety, depression, an outburst, the suicidal ideation, whatever it may be. You have to find a way to stack those blocks again, or not. So, the media reminds us what we go to. These are some of the incidents that stick in my mind, and why I remember them, I don't know. For years and years and years, I remember the names of the fatalities and the mileposts that they occurred on Interstate 90. Why? I don't know. I don't think I ever shared that with anybody. It wasn't something I was proud of. It's just something that just kept sticking in my head. Addresses, the ages, the names, the feelings. So the crashes result in a fatality, injuries. 1 dies in Post Falls rollover, 3 hurt head on US 95 head on. The Post Falls rollover was in the middle of the night. It was a mundane call as it was dispatched. And we get there, and there is one female unconscious lying on the ground, and there was another female lying crushed by the C-post, hanging halfway out the car. And with limited resources and not the correct resources dispatched initially, it was one of those where we had to pick and choose. We chose to work on the female that was free of the vehicle, and I watched the girl underneath the vehicle take her last breaths. Was she viable? I don't know. I'll never know. But that was scene sears in my head, because once we got the one female transported and the other female was determined to be deceased, we had to stay there until the coroner got on scene, until the investigation was complete. And it was 4 hours of staring at a yellow sheet over a dead body, followed up with extrication of her. And it was what we were dealt that night, and we dealt with it professionally. And I'm sure we talked about it, the pros and cons and what we could have done different, but it's still in my head. Mother of 4 dies after being struck in the parking lot. So in Post Falls, Station 1 is right along Idaho Street and Interstate 90. Across the interstate and across Celtice is Super 1. This 39-year-old woman was simply walking from her vehicle into the store on a dark and rainy night, and was innocently ran over. Our on scene time was fast, or en route time was fast. Our transport time was fast, and we couldn't save her. She was right across the street and got ran over, and we couldn't do anything about it. This isn't a call that I dwell on, but it's a call that was horrible. And it's just another Jenga block that comes out that promotes that stack to falling over. So you were not alone. Members of this group, the Fools group, were part of these calls. Several years ago, there was a mom fatally shot when the son, who was 2, grabbed a gun from her purse in Walmart in Hayden and shot her and killed her. That's a pretty significant trauma. And I'm sorry if these calls bring up some really bad feelings that you may have. I will ask you to cope with your feelings and recognize that you're not alone. There's a 20-year-old Sago man dies in Highway 200 crash. So Monday morning crash near Ponderay kills a 2-year-old Sandpoint girl. I believe this happened on Highway 200 near Colburn Road. And it was, I remember seeing pictures in the paper, and I remember hearing stories from the first responders. It's not a fun thing. A few years ago, surgeons had to cram into a semi to amputate a driver's leg to save him. I know crews that were there on this call, on this training, and if you think about it, you can feel the coldness in the air, the way the icy roads were, the frustrations of prying on a certain piece of metal and it not doing what you wanted it to, and the sounds that this Ukrainian or Russian driver was making, who couldn't speak English, and trying to communicate, and frustrations of that. It's not easy. ISP releasing the names of 2 injured when a trailer detaches from a semi truck in 95. Just south of Coeur d'Alene, a semi truck lost his trailer, and a passenger car went right up underneath of it. So innocent. First thing in the morning, right after shift exchange, where I would have been on the call, but I wasn't. And then just last month, the Sandpoint woman died in a single car crash north of Athol. She was 35 years old. And that happened really close to the Carywood fire station. Painful stuff. And it's not easy. And that's where we're talking about it. And I'll give you resources at the end if you need to talk about it with someone else. So, my call. My call occurred on Mother's Day of 2010. I believe it was the 10th of May, which is exactly the same month and day it was this year, the 10th of May. It was a beautiful day, mid-afternoon, and this picture that's on the screen is a wedding venue about half a mile down the road from where the incident occurred. It's a very large family in the area, and we were dispatched to a motor vehicle accident, simple enough. And inherently as first responders, we get excited when there's something that we're going to be able to get to use our skills on. We don't pull hose every day or pull the extrication tools out and cut cars up every day on real incidents. We trained for it. But this incident, started off with a pretty promising, cool call. And the more we were dispatched to it, the more I realized it was not good. This was the first time I cried on the way to a call, but it came out as there's a child trapped in between the duals of a semi truck and was stuck. And so we get there about the same time with the Coeur d'Alene ambulance, and there's family members around, and there's this little girl lying on the tailgate of a pickup, covered in a blanket, with her hair hanging out the top, not her face. There's bloody matted hair, and her pink cowboy boots were hanging out the bottom. Her name was Julie, and this day, the story behind the whole thing is horrific. It was a great family, very involved in the community and the fair, and the dad was a truck driver, and he came home, and he was home for Mother's Day, and he decided to take his boy down to the shop just down the road to work on his brakes and get ready to get back on the road. And unbeknownst to him, his little girl was playing on the truck and fell in between the duals and was, killed on the way down the road. And so the other thing that sticks out in this thing is that once we were there and determined that it was a fatal incident, we were not allowed to leave the scene the same way we came in, because there were bits and pieces of this child on the road, and it was deemed a crime scene, or it had to be investigated. So we were stuck on scene with a crying and grieving family with nowhere to go. The first responders, we were crying, and it was just such a tough scene, and then not able to leave. We were there for a couple of hours. The saving grace for me for this whole thing is that I was able to call out and talk to my oldest daughter, who was around 5 at the time, 5, 7, something like that. But we were able to leave and go out a different direction, way out of the way. But this is my call. And when I went back to the Center of Excellence, this is the call that I worked on. And you talk about it and you break it down and you make it okay and you cope with it. The memory never goes away, but you find ways to cope with it, to make it so it's not such an intrusive thing in your life. When I first called the Center of Excellence, it's so easy once you make the call. But the other guy on the other end, he first says, "Hey, thanks for calling. My name's Greg. What can I help you with?" And so I, vaguely expressed what my problem was. And then he asked some simple questions and he asked me if I had PTSD. And I said, I don't know. I know more of the signs and symptoms now, but at the time I've never been to war, and I've never been shot at, and I've never been the stereotypical PTSD guy. But the more I was counseled, the more I talked about it, the more I thought about what was really going on. This call was so intrusive that I'd be mid-conversation and thoughts of the pink boots or thoughts of the road going in would come into my mind, or I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. I wouldn't say I had nightmares, but it would come in and I'd think about it, in detail so many times a day throughout a month. And it just became normal. Think about all the calls that we would go on. And really it isn't. It's not normal whatsoever. It is PTSD in a certain form. It may not be the extreme PTSD, but it was PTSD that affected me in a negative way. So sustained, not treated, poor adjustments with negative coping strategies, whether it be drinking or acting out sexually or risky behaviors or drugs and continuous trauma leads to a lot of bad things. So how first responders develop serious mental issues: when you have exposure to death, grief, injury, pain, or loss, coupled with demanding schedules, physically challenging jobs, and lack of safety and security, can result in emotional trauma. And if it's left untreated, it can lead to depression, anxiety, PTSD, suicidal ideation, and eventually suicide. The schedules that we have are terrific. Working a 48, 96-hour shift it's a blessing, but it's also not. If you're at a busy firehouse and you're running 3-4 calls at night, it wears on you. A set or two in a row wears on you a little bit. 3, 4, 5 sets in a row can really start messing with your head, and you start questioning what you're even doing at work, and you start having attitudes toward your patients for even thinking about calling at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you get pissed off for no reason, and you start acting out and you start cannibalizing your crew. You can, not always, but it can happen. So anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, I had all these things. And the anxiety to me was responding. The picture I had in my mind was responding to the high school for a 15-year-old girl with chest pain or difficulty breathing, and she's hyperventilating, or going to someone's house on Thanksgiving with chest pain and difficulty breathing, and their fingers are numb and tingling, and you're sitting there just trying to talk them down. That was anxiety to me. And the more treatment I got and the more medications I started taking, I realized that anxiety was a huge part of what was going on in my life. I would stew about the simplest things. If my wife answered one of my questions a little bit differently that I really expected, then I would think, oh, she's mad at me, or oh, what am I going to do to fix this? Or if I didn't call somebody back in time, I would be like, oh, I'm a bad person. I didn't call them back in time. They're going to think I'm not reliable. And a lot of the anxiety and anxiousness and the fear of the unknown really kind of got out of control for me. And I was challenged that a lot of people saw that, but I felt it. I felt it on the inside. The PTSD, the substance abuse, the alcohol, it just got out of control. I'd show up to parties with my own bottle of whiskey because I liked whiskey, and I'd be shit faced before anybody else, and I'd be the most shit faced one by the time everybody left. And it was a funny thing for a while, and then it just kind of got to be a nuisance, and it really started wearing on my marriage and my family. I always had a designated driver because my wife was so pissed off at me. She wouldn't drink because she knew she'd be driving home. It wasn't good for me. And even now, those memories are still fresh in my wife's mind, and they affect her a lot. It's a little bit of PTSD for her too. It's not just the first responder; it's the family it's involved too. This is a family affair. Everybody's involved. So mental illness can be invisible. You can have anxiety, but still sound confident, still do well in interviews, still do well on calls, provide trainings, and not skip a beat. You can have depression, but you can still smile, make jokes, and be one of the guys. You can feel suicidal, but still turn up to work every day and appear fine, and reflect back to that definition of fine I gave earlier. So this is another weird thing that I did. I kept all my whiskey bottles, the last whiskey bottles that I had, the last whiskey that I drank. I was a Canadian whiskey guy, and I still love it, but I don't drink. And I'm okay with that. I've come to grips with that. I'm able to go to outings and not drink. And my biggest crutch was here at home. Is I like to drink at home. For a long time, I felt like I drank because I like to drink. And when it really came down to reality, I drank to suppress a lot of the anxiety and feelings that I was going through. And, if you're a happy drinker, when you drink, things get jovial and funny, and you have funny conversations. And I really missed some of the campfire talk at the river, but guess what? I found that I could still have the campfire talk and be jovial and joking without drinking. So it's really an interesting transition. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's called recovery for a reason, because I'm still recovering from it. I don't know what it would be like if I'm a little afraid of myself if I were to be alone and be able to allow myself to jump back into where I was, and how easy it would grasp me and pull me back in. I think it would be really tough to drag myself out. And with the drinking stuff, people that can drink and cope with their things and drink, what am I trying to say? Drink responsibly. That's okay. Have a plan and don't go over the top. I was blacking out every single night, and while that sounds a little extreme, I didn't remember going to bed a lot of the nights that last summer before I went and got help. It's crazy. So I was that last summer of 2018 where things really broke down, and I reached out for help. Talked to my battalion chief about it, and went from there. I became vulnerable and transparent somewhat overnight, willing to share my story, wanting to help others, and willing to change. And I found that when I made that call and I traveled from here to DC, that's such a huge step in life. And uh, to leave your family for 30 days during hunting season, right when they went back to school, is a huge thing. I would have gone sooner, but my daughter started kindergarten the first week of September, and I wanted to see her at her first day of school. I kind of wish I would have gone earlier, but it was so important to me that I was with her, holding her hand as she walked to her classroom, um, that I waited to the 6th. So the IAFF Center of Excellence for Behavioral Health Treatment and Recovery. This is one venue available to first responders for behavioral treatment and recovery. It is in Upper Marble, Maryland. It's about an hour drive from any of the area airports, but it changed my life and it saved my life. I recognized that I wasn't alone. I recognized that really good people were there for a myriad of reasons. And everybody was there for their own traumas and their own reasons. And you'd listen to their stories, and you go, that's really not that bad, but it's bad to them. And maybe you share your story and they think the same thing, but your trauma is your trauma. There were guys there that had been retired for a couple of years and really weren't prepped for retirement and started having a drinking problem. They were mentally fine, but they just needed a little bit of help with their alcohol use. And then there were guys there that were prior military, significant mental trauma, significant PTSD, like continuously not sleeping because of nightmares and bad dreams. And on top of that, they had a heroin problem. Really good people got mixed up with really bad things, and they were there to get help. And the fact that they made that trip was a testament to their strength and their willingness to get help. And anybody in the audience that needs that help, I would totally encourage calling the number, which you'll have at the end. Calling the number doesn't mean you have to go. Calling the number is a way to allow yourself to seek out that help. Maybe it's local, maybe it's not. There's also other not institutions. There are other treatment centers throughout the U.S. that cater to all persons, but the specific thing about this one is that it caters to union firefighters.
Adam, I wanted to share something real quick before we continued on with the group.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the comments, I don't know if any of you guys have seen in the comments, we left a number to text. It's 741-741. You text the word badge, and we've tested it out just to see if they would respond prior to needing their help. If you need help for other people or yourself, I personally texted it. They got right back to me, and it's a group out of Colorado that Fit to Fight Fire had recommended. And they were very nice about getting back to you quickly. And I think they're a good resource if you just need someone to chat with. If you've had a bad call, you've had a bad day, you're having trouble with your finances at home, and you want to talk to someone else rather than your normal group of people that maybe you just don't want to talk to. So anyway, we have it in the comments. We're going to have it in the email. We'll have it on our Facebook page. But just be aware that there is help out there if you need it, and you can reach out, and nobody will ever know about it. And it's just a good resource. So thank you. Go ahead, Adam, when you're ready.
I was going to follow this up now and then to get at the end. Peer support is a huge thing that has been a blessing that I don't know it's really been tapped into a whole lot. But Coeur d'Alene Fire has a peer support group, and Kootenai County Fire Rescue has a peer support group. Post Falls Police has a peer support group, And the invite is to anyone, including the public, that has any issues that may need some confidential guidance. You tap into, I'm just going to use you, Jeff. I'm sure anybody can call you and say, hey, Jeff, how do I handle this? You're not a psychologist. You can't prescribe medications, but you know some of the resources of where to send people should they be experiencing an issue. And it's the same thing with these peer support groups. You may not know Sergeant Harmon with Post Falls PD, but he is a resource, and he is a huge resource of things that you may need. And he's not your supervisor. He's not doesn't really know your personal life, but he cares enough for first responders to be able to reach out to and provide the guidance you may need. And I'm throwing my own name out there as well. Watch the Coeur Fools Facebook page. We'll somehow get the flyers up on Facebook, Jeff, so we can post them and share the names of some of those who are trained and know that all these personal and private stories must be kept confidential. So that's some of the rules of this group. If you share something in this group, it's your story. This is being recorded, and we're hoping to have it up on YouTube in some short time frame. So if you don't want to share here, that's okay. I mentioned earlier that I am vulnerable and transparent. I care to share my story and share my growth, where I've been and where I am now. And so I'm okay with it being pre-recorded and available for others to learn from as well. So we're not here to judge yourself or others. And again, it's okay not to speak if you don't want. All right.
As you mentioned, Adam, with reaching out to the fools, we do have resources. We're not certified we're not psychologists like you said, but anybody can email us at any time, and any of the e-board members can point you in the right direction at coifools@gmail.com. So that's a resource for anybody that we can try to get you in the right direction. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep. So here's the not so fun part and not so fun storytelling. We're going to talk about suicide. I'm not here to glorify it or make it okay. As I said earlier, I'm simply sharing these stories to maybe make you aware of a symptom you weren't aware of before, and maybe make it to where you can recognize one of your guys is having a bad day and they may need a little extra guidance or assistance. So this general population we have of civilians, see people and they think this is what depression looks like. And I'm not sure if Marilyn Manson's depressed or not. I don't know. But I really would have never thought that Robin Williams would have never in a million years thought that somebody that made people laugh for years and years would kill himself. And this meme showed up on Facebook a couple of years ago, and it resonated with me. I have dealt with depression. I haven't dealt with deep, dark depression, but when it hits you, you can't describe it. And it's, you just don't want to be, you want to escape yourself, is how I kind of described it. I'd go hang out with my dad, and he's like, what's going on? I'm like, I need a break from myself. And that's very vague, but you have a lack of joy in anything that you do. And if you decide to go out and mow the lawn or do yard work or do a hobby that made you happy in the past, you're no longer enjoy it. Boating. I mean, we all typically like going out on the boat. I mean, you can find some joy in it, but there's a certain point in time where that did not sound fun to me whatsoever. Hanging out with other people, no thanks. I don't want to be around anybody. I just drink by myself, not out of shame or anything, but because I like drinking by myself. That's kind of what I told myself. Right now, we're going to learn about Chip Terry.
and you just took it as it's part of the job. I don't think anybody realizes the toll it takes on them, even when you're living with them, you know, for 30 years.
But what people don't see at 3 o'clock in the morning is when a young lieutenant has to put 2 toddlers and their grandmother in a body bag. Well, what happens when we go home? You know, we take those things home to our children and our wives.
I heard a knock on the door. The dog started barking. As I was coming down the steps, it's a glass door. I saw 3 men in suits. And I knew. We owe it to these first responders to get them the mental health that they need. And the only way I feel like we can do that is with awareness. So my goal in life right now is if we can take the awareness to that level where people know that there are places to go and resources available, let's do it, you know.
So the reality is that there are first responders committing suicide often. I think one of the last, significant headline is that more first responders are killing themselves than are dying in the line of duty. That's it should be troubling for all of us, and that only reflects the first responders that we know about. I'm going to introduce you guys to some people you don't know, but I did, and they're now gone. This Paul Combs illustration is not just a picture in a magazine that you flip over. You really got to look at it. You really got to recognize what it means and what it says. And I'll tell you that I look around at my crew, and I have the majority of my career, and I generally don't see people that are hurting or dealing with bad things. It's either because they're not and they're coping with things well. They have a coping mechanism that is far better than mine, or they are, and they just don't. They just hide it well. And I will also tell you that a lot of my, I don't want to call it a mental illness, but a lot of the mental anguish that I am experiencing or have experienced and I'm talking about is not all job related. When you're back at the Center of Excellence, they really try to flush out what things are wrong and how they started. And a lot of my things go back to childhood and family mental illness diagnosis. My mom, a lot of my things come from my childhood and my mom, and it just is the way it is. I can't change it, but I can change how I cope with them. So before we talk about Mike, when you go to the Center of Excellence, you're given a thick binder and you're given a bag to put all your stuff in, and it's just copious amounts of material to go through and to be able to learn from coping skills with addictions, grief. And I just found this today, and it says 5 things we can do to all help stop suicide. And the first one, I'm just going to go over the first one because it's remove the stigma. The first thing we can all do to prevent suicide is to talk about it. No person is in a suicidal state or struggling with any mental health issue should have to feel silenced or shamed. The same is true for people who are worried about a friend or a family member. They should know they can reach out and make a difference. Too often, people are afraid to bring up the subject of suicide, fearing that they'll be wrong or put the idea in someone's head. This is a big misconception. People need to talk about suicide and open the doors of communications to those suffering with suicidal thoughts. These individuals need to know that they are not alone and that there's an entire community who is there, who can relate, and who will support them in the hardest of times. I'll tell you that I've digressed a little bit, and I asked my wife to leave the house today, not out of spite or being mad, but out of the shame that I've felt for even contemplating the ideation of suicide. And not that I've ever had a plan or acted out on it. It's a stigma that it's a shameful thing to even think about it. And I didn't want her to have to hear this or anything I say, or I just didn't want any memories or anything to come back of where we've been. And I read this to her before I came, and I said, I'm digressing. I'm ashamed that you have to hear this, and that's one of the steps we can do to help stop it is to, talk to our loved ones about it. Not that we're going to act on anything, but just to let our loved ones know where our mental state is and how we can help each other out. So, Mike Montanik, you guys don't know him. You didn't hear about him. There wasn't any headlines about him. Mike was a fireman with the Coral Springs Fire Department. Coral Springs is either in the first due or in the area of the Parkland shooting that occurred in 2018, February 2018, that killed multiple kids and is still in the headlines today. So Mike was, from my understanding, assigned to an ambulance that day and responded to this school shooting, and he essentially injured himself during this incident, which rendered him unable to work. And being unable to work, being able to be with your brothers and talk about these things, he was alone. And with being injured and that mental anguish that occurred from the call, he got hooked on oxys. So with the injuries, he was prescribed narcotics. Once those narcotics ran out, he wanted more. So he had a dealer. And when his dealer wouldn't sell or ran out, he went to heroin. And it was a vicious cycle for him. He shared, he was vulnerable and he was transparent on what happened with him. Nonetheless, he reached out for help. He got help. And he had a really tough time at the center. But on his last day that he was there, we all, it's a celebration and it's a graduation that you have shown strength and you have dealt with your demons and you are willing to jump back to your normal life with these new things that you've learned. And he shared just a really good story about growing up and taking time for yourself. And it was really moving. This was a really good guy. And a week later, he shot himself. And it was a really big deal for the staff at the center because no one had ever left the center and committed suicide. Around the time that I was there was roughly 450 people that had graduated and or received treatment there. And this was a huge thing for them. And we talked about Mike a lot because he had such a profound impression on a lot of people and a great story. And he persevered. He rose above. And for him to go home and kill himself was pretty devastating. So Ben was a Blackfoot fireman, 39 years old. Some of you knew him through the PFFI, certainly more intimately than I did. I had met him, but I did not really know him or his story. And in 2018, late 2018, we lost Ben. He hung himself. Charlie out of Boise Fire, last year, he hung himself. I don't know his story, but there are others that do. And it's sad we couldn't get help to Charlie soon enough, and he hung himself in the station. That's kind of a worst nightmare for an officer or anyone in the fire service, is to know that their brother killed himself in the fire station. So Nicole, I did not know. She was from Fairfax County Fire Department. Beautiful girl, 31 years old, and she hung herself in 2016. There were several reports afterwards that Nicole was being harassed and bullied within the fire station, and it broke her down. It broke her down so much that she felt she needed to kill herself. If we're finding ourselves, if we look back and we think about all the joking and the ribbing and the brotherly stuff that we do for our brothers and sisters, I know I personally have witnessed some bullying and some things that just isn't good. It's not nice. It's not productive. Condescending nicknames for some of our probies or new firefighters, it starts wearing on people. Even though it may be funny for the masses, we need to think about individually what it's doing for the mental health of some of these firemen. Just catch yourself. Be a leader. Be positive and optimistic. So, Battalion Chief David Dangerfield, self-inflicted gunshot wound. He's from Indian River County Fire and Rescue in Florida, and he announced it to the world that PTSD for firefighters is real. If your loved one experiences science, get them help. 27 years of deaths of babies and dying in your hands is a memory you never get rid of. It haunted me daily until now. He finally decided that he had come to peace with suicide, and he was okay with it. But he wanted those left out in the fire service world that to get help when you can. PTSD is real, and it is real. So Ryan Jones, I was at the treatment center with him. He had been there 9 months before I got there for alcohol use. And he came back. He had whatever he had done in his personal life, he was done with fire service. But having been a union firefighter, he was still eligible to come back and get help at the center. So he did. He came back. He was very relaxed and had a great story, and loved his family. At least that's the way it was portrayed. And he was there for drinking. And it sounds like there was some coexisting mental issues. When I say coexisting, there was something drug or alcohol related and mental related, which is what the majority of the persons at the Center of Excellence experienced. But Ryan's no longer with us. He killed himself in March. I don't know how or why. I did not keep in contact with him, but it's a sad thing. I've already shared this with some of my closest friends, that when I was at the center, there was roughly 24, 25 people there. And it's almost a revolving door, meaning that, when people are there roughly 30 to 45 days, they graduate and leave, and then new people are always coming in every day. And so on average, there was 25 people there. Well, since I've been there, roughly six or seven people have committed suicide, and I don't know why. It's very sad. I don't know why. Karen was a driver in Hillsborough County, Florida, in around Tampa Bay area, and she was there for some fairly significant mental things going on. I felt like she had shown a lot of progress and was receiving the help that she needed. When you're at the Center of Excellence, you go to a lot of group therapy, so you do hear other people's stories, and amongst ourselves, we should keep them confidential. Um, but she was progressing; she was doing well, and I don't know what happened July 28th, but she decided it was the end, and uh, I made the mistake of looking through through her Facebook page and reading a lot of the comments from her family and her friends, and it's just another reminder of when you decide to end it, um, the memories you leave behind, the family you leave behind, and the kids you leave behind, and the memories that they had with you when you were alive, and all the memories they're going to make without you. And there's that first Christmas, there's that first birthday, and it's so unfair to them, living life without their parent, their uncle, their aunt, and it really made an impact on me just reading through those last week about Karen. So I'm going to go on. I've a few pictures of Battalion Chief Brooke Smith, who's 38 years old, from Titusville, Florida. And to put that in perspective, Titusville is Titusville is the first new fire department that responds to the Cape Canaveral launch site for NASA. And so Brooke had a lot of stories to share about that, and just his story. He started the fire service young. He was a SWAT medic with the local sheriff's department, and worked it up through the ranks of battalion chief. He had a beautiful wife and two young boys, and his blocks finally fell over, and he kind of I wouldn't say went off the deep end, but he needed help. He had expressed committing suicide, and so the fire department put him on leave, and it was a requirement that he sought out treatment. So he shows up at the treatment center, and he's the guy that cracks jokes, the guy that you confide in, the guy that you feel really comfortable talking to. This guy's a monster. He's 6'3" and 250 and pure muscle. You first look, you'd think he's a meathead, then he cracks some joke, and he's a super smart guy. And I think if you guys all think about the guys that are in your firehouses, you know who I'm talking about. The guys that are always sharing funny jokes, or the guy that always acts professionally around the public, that has nice things to say, that's optimistic, and the guy that you want to be around. The thing about Brooke is that he was super proud to have been a UCF cheerleader. And we all just kind of laughed at him. We're like, "You were not a cheerleader." And he's got videos of when he was in college in the early 2000s, and he was a cheerleader for sure. And now he's the biggest, baddest, tough fireman. And we all, I don't know, he was just a really good guy, and a guy that you look forward to connecting with after you get out of the center and everything's good, and you can meet up. I mean, he's in Florida. We had plans to go there when it was snow on the ground here and sun over there, but it never happened. So I'm not going to share this video. I'll describe it to you. But this was a rogue photographer, videographer that captured the car accident and the fire department arriving on scene. And essentially, Brooke, as a lieutenant on this call, in his incident command role, the patients were taken care of, and he took care of the kids. He built a rapport with them. He was talking to them, and then all of a sudden there was something launching at the launch pad, and he took the kids over and was explaining to them and showing the missile going in the air, and it's the type of person that you want to be on the scene, building a rapport with the kids, the future of the fire service, and the kids that are scared right after a car accident. You all know what that feels like and looks like. the kids that we bring a teddy bear to. And just the photographer complimented him on this, what's your name, and great job with the kids. And that's the type of guy he was. And he killed himself, 5 months after being at the center. And it was probably the biggest hit for me because of that rapport that we had with each other. And I have such bigger relationships with many of you on this screen. I couldn't imagine losing any one of you to any of this. So there are so many more suicides that we are not aware of, suicides we don't hear about. And I'd prefer not to hear about them. I prefer they didn't happen. But the statistics that are out there regarding first responder suicides are somewhat skewed. But according to the IAFF, PTSD is a serious and chronic condition that can ruin the lives of firefighters, paramedics, destroy families, and jeopardize public and fire safety. According to the Journal of Occupational Health, approximately 20% of firefighters and paramedics have PTSD. Furthermore, according to a 2015 Florida State University study, nearly half of the firefighters surveyed, 46.8%, have thought about suicide. 19% have had suicide plans, and 15% have made suicide attempts. In fact, those with PTSD are 6 times more likely to attempt suicide compared to demographically matched controls. So what is PTSD in a nutshell? And that's a whole nother presentation, really. But it can develop after exposure to potentially traumatic event that is beyond a typical stressor. Eventually leads to PTSD events that can lead up to it, but are not limited to violent personal assaults, natural or human-caused disasters, accidents, combat, and other forms of violence. Exposure to events like these are common. About 1/2 of all U.S. adults will experience at least one traumatic event in their lives, but most do not develop PTSD. People who experience PTSD may have persistent, frightening thoughts and memories of the events, experience sleep problems, feel detached or numb, or may be easily started. In severe forms, PTSD can significantly impair a person's ability to perform work at home and or socially. This is a chart that has been out there for several years, and that, firefighters, 40% of us have had ideation of some sort. Believe it or not, I truly believe it. 19% have had plans, and 16 have had attempts. And the numbers on the right are the general population of civilians and their ideation plans and attempts. And first responders are significantly higher. A couple of years ago, there was fire department lip sync challenges and law enforcement lip sync challenges, and they were fairly cool and fairly comical. This Yorktown one really hit home with just the things they were portraying about the types of calls they were running, and a particular member that had problems with drinking and suicide. And again, through the glitchiness of the video, I hope you guys can feel the message that they're trying to share.
Falling too fast to prepare for this. Tripping in the world could be dangerous. Everybody circling as vultures. Negative, nepotist. Everybody waiting for the fall of man. Everybody praying for the end of times. Everybody hoping they could be the one. I was born to run, I was born for this. Whip, run me like a racehorse. Pull me like a ripcord. Break me down and build me up. I wanna be the slip. Word upon your lip. Rather that you rip. Break me down and build me up. Whatever it takes. Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I do whatever it takes. Cause I love how it feels when I break the chain. I need ya, I need you right now.
don't let me down. I think I'm losing my mind now. It's in my head, darling. I hope that you'll be here when I need you the most. Don't let me down. Don't let me down.
Down. All these voices in my head get loud. I wish that I could shut them down. I'm sorry that I let you down. Let you down. Yeah, don't talk down to me, that's not gonna work now. Packed all my clothes and I moved out. I don't even wanna go to your house. Every time I sit on that couch, I feel like you lecture me. Eventually, I bet that we could've made this work and probably would've figured things out. But I guess I'm a letdown, but it's cool, I checked out. Oh, you wanna be friends now? Okay, let's put my fake face on and pretend now. Sit around and talk about the good times that didn't even happen. I mean, why are you laughing? Must have missed that joke, let me see if I can find a reaction. No, but at least you're happy. Feels like we're on the edge right now. I could say I'm proud. Sorry that I let you down. Oh, I let you down. All these voices in my head. In these times of doing what you're told, keep these feelings, no one knows. Whatever happened to the young man's heart? Swallowed my pain as he slowly fell apart. And I'm staring down the barrel of a 45, swimming through the ashes of another life. No real reason to accept the way things have changed. Staring down the barrel of a 45. It's been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. We've come a long way from where we began. Oh, I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. When I see you again. Whatever it takes, whatever it takes. Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I do whatever it takes. Cause I love how it feels when I break the chains. Whatever it takes. You take me to the top, I'm ready for whatever it takes. Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I'll do what it takes.
Last year, it was reported that 243 first responders took their own lives. This included police officers, firefighters, and EMS personnel. That's a number that surpassed all line-of-duty deaths for that year. This is an unfortunate and unacceptable trend across all public service entities. The deeply troubling thing is that the number of actual suicides is most likely more than what's stated due to reporting discrepancies. We created this video to highlight this troublesome trend and to provide steps of identifying those in need and resources to help share the load. Identification and education are the stepping stones to prevention. Suicide doesn't have one single cause, and the signs aren't always obvious. Some warning signs include talking about or looking for ways to die or kill oneself, talking about feeling hopeless or having no purpose, being trapped, or in unbearable pain. Talk about being a burden to others, increasing use of drugs and alcohol, acting anxious, agitated, or reckless, sleeping too little or sleeping too much, withdrawal or feeling isolated, showing rage or talking about seeking revenge, displaying extreme mood swings. These are just a few possible signs, but there could also be others. The Share the Load campaign, spearheaded by the National Volunteer Firefighter Council, has provided 5 steps to follow for helping anyone in need. First off, ask. Ask them if they're okay. Ask them if they need help. Keep them safe. Whether it's at your house or somewhere else, keep them from doing harm. Be there. Be there to comfort, talk, or whatever, as long as you're there for them. Help them connect. Give them the resources to get the help they need. Follow up. Continue to show you care. Ask them how they're doing or if they need any other help. The National Volunteer Fire Council has a fire and EMS helpline available. You can call them at 1-888-731-FIRE. You'll be connected to somebody that can help you immediately and provide you resources to help you work past this tough time in your life. The National Law Enforcement Officers Hotline, COP Line, is a peer-supported resource that can be contacted at 1-800-267-5463. Another resource is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's available 24/7, and you can call that at 1-800-273-TALK. Or you can also chat on their website. All these operations are 24/7, and all calls are strictly confidential, and there's no fear of punitive repercussions for making the call. If you need help, please reach out. Your brothers and sisters are here for you. You don't have to go this alone.
All right. Fairly powerful little message that they have. A lot of this might make sense to some of you, and some of it's just purely educational, but a lot of us that spent some time on Facebook know the Fire Department Chronicles. Jason, ball guy, funny, and we laugh at a lot of his videos. Last year, he put out an excellent 5-minute video that we're going to watch again, and it just brings a lot of it together. And it doesn't normalize suicide, but it brings it together that you're not alone, I'm not alone, and that's once again, those that are famous struggle from time to time, and they seek outlets to cope with whatever they're dealing with. So here's a short message from Jason.
Hey guys, my name is Jason Patton. I am an 11-year veteran firefighter. I'm also the creator of Fire Department Chronicles. I make funny videos for firefighters. But May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And because of that, I wanted to tell you guys a story about myself, come to you guys with something that's a little more real, a little more honest, with how I felt in the past, especially since there's been so many firefighter suicides and so much mental health issues in first responders. Roughly 3 years ago, I was suffering with some depression. I've had some depression issues throughout my life, but for some reason 3 years ago, it became a lot worse than it had ever been. I'm normally able to deflect it or kind of laugh it off with some friends, but for some reason, this particular scenario was a lot worse than I had ever dealt with. I had my first thought of suicide when I was a little bit younger, thought about it a little bit, but it kind of went away. And then in the time where it got the worst, 3 years ago, I had a small thought of suicide. It was maybe suicide would make it better. And then as the depression got a little bit worse, as the thoughts got worse, the suicide came up more and more and more. And then I started to fantasize about it. I started to think about it more. I started to think of the different ways that I could kill myself, the fastest ways, so on and so forth. But that last one where I was legitimately sitting or laying on my gym floor, going through the process, I had never actually thought about and envisioned putting a gun in my mouth and pulling the trigger and that being it. That had never come to my brain the way that it did in that moment. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. So I've actually been personally affected by suicide. My dad's best friend killed himself. It was rough because his kids were really young at the time, and I have a 3-year-old daughter. And I remember they were getting a divorce, and he wasn't okay with it. So he, instead of trying to work through it or think about his children, he went into the bathroom and shot himself while his family was in the living room. And I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to want to do that, because you're just tired of it. You don't want to deal with the process anymore. So I felt his pain, and I was young at the time, but I can't imagine leaving my kids, because I had to see what his kids dealt with after that. His kids had to grow up without a father. In fact, his one child didn't even realize that he killed himself until he was 10 years older. It's not fair. It's not fair, and it hurts me to think that instead of giving it time, working through it, he took the way out, and his family had to suffer because of it. It took me a long time to really come to process this. I've been a firefighter for 11 years, and I've seen a lot of bad things. And I've seen my fellow firefighters kill themselves because instead of talking to each other, instead of doing what was best for themselves, they decided to take their own lives. That should never be the option. If the last option is you talking to someone, that has to be the option. Your brothers and sisters are here for you. You're never alone. You are never alone, and it does not make you less of a man or less of a woman or less of a first responder to talk to the people around you or utilize the people that are there to help you. I promise you are loved. We all are. But you have to utilize that love. You have to let go. I came very close to killing myself, and the only thing that stopped me was I didn't want to be a statistic. We're better than that. Use the people around you. There are numbers out there that you can call. People will always be there to talk to you. Killing yourself is never the option. I hope my story will help you. I hope my story will inspire you to talk to people, to laugh about stuff, but always seek the end result, which is peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
So I thought Jason's message was short and sweet, to the point, and very real. So let's get to the resolve and the end of the presentation, and how to fix some of this stuff, how to cope with it. So recognize that if you're having a bad day, you are definitely not one of the only ones that recognizes it. Your wife and your kids recognize it, even though they may not say anything. My kids noticed. This what I'm going to share with you was done about a year ago, and I'd let Luke play with my computer, and he'd do schoolwork and math stuff, and then make these little presentations that were out of the blue and do these little self-made projects. And then he'd inevitably close one of my screens and screw something up, and so you just kind of have to laugh about it now. But he made this pretty profound presentation that really gets me from time to time. So it starts off with, "Good morning, Dad." So I see it. I'm like, "What's all this about?" And then, "Good morning. Get ready to start the day from Luke. To a good dad." And thinking, where is this thing going? And it says, "Don't be sad, even though it is hard because of all the horrible things you see almost every day. I will always love you." And this hit me pretty hard, and it continues to. I don't feel like I can talk about a lot of horrible things, but he definitely overhears a lot of horrible things. Maybe I'm on the phone talking about a call with somebody else, or being pessimistic about something. It's something that they grasp onto and they hold, and it's his way of showing me that he knows and he loves me, and it's going to be okay. And I know a lot of your kids feel the same way, even though it may not be on your computer waiting for you when you open it. So this is my family. This is a new life of sobriety and happiness. It ebbs and flows, and it's a continuous process. It's not something that I present and then life's going to be great for another 6 months. It's something that daily I have to be aware of, my head and what's going on, and it's this family that keeps me strong. It's the ability to play with them and communicate with them, and for them to be here when I get home. And when my kids get older, I'm going to miss the pitter patter of the feet, running towards the front door. That's already slowly waning. But when they were younger, I'll never forget that feeling or the thought. So some of the solutions, I put this picture of my wife in here on the bottom because she's really goofy. We get along so well together, and we're gross, and we were meant for each other. We went to Mount Rushmore a few years ago, and this was the picture she wanted me to take. Here, take a picture of me licking George Washington's nose. And it's just something that kind of makes me snap out of whatever, and it makes me feel good. So counseling is a solution. I was always against counseling my whole life because my mom was always in counseling. And I determined early on that I would never be like her, and I would never seek out counseling. And that was a futile mistake. I wish I had done it sooner. And it's not just any general counseling. When I first sought a counselor in Coeur d'Alene, it was someone that our EAP program recommended. And for me, our EAP program has been nothing but an utter failure. And I hope you don't experience that, but I took a recommendation from that, went and saw the guy, gave him a couple of sessions, and his recommendation for me to stop drinking was to, why don't you just log how much you drink, and then that way you can look at it and see how much you're drinking. That was his best advice out of 3 visits. And I knew that counseling wasn't for me, and I never went back to one until I went to the Center of Excellence and sought out professionals that had worked with hundreds of firefighters that knew what they were talking about, that knew the experiences that we had experienced. And when you get ready to leave the Center of Excellence, they have you fill out a wellness plan. And in this wellness recovery plan, you talk about your, what may trigger you to drink or have a mental episode, and they make you write down what you're going to do. And it's a guideline. It's a personal policy manual that if you're having a bad day, you can open it up and say, okay, when you were in the right frame of mind, you can go for a walk, do exercise, count to 10, whatever it's going to be to cope with that thing you're dealing with. So when I talked about the Center of Excellence quite a bit, Deer Hollow right above that is another treatment center that's in Utah that I know other members of the Idaho Fire Service have used. They have great reviews for it. It's certainly not as far as Maryland, but it's a treatment center that helps you deal with addiction problems or mental health issues. Stress management and coping skills. How are you dealing with a bad call? Are you able to talk to somebody about it? Are you willing to open up? Are you willing to go home and not open that bottle of whiskey and instead do something productive? Bike ride, work on a presentation, whatever it may be to keep you from drinking or redirect you from drinking or having a mental breakdown. So medications. I was never a medications guy, but I am a firm believer that maybe your brain is not as intact or chemically sound as it once was, and you may need a little redirection. When I went to the Center of Excellence, they started me on a regiment of medications, and I thought to myself, man, 6 different medications. I don't take any at home. The doctor wants me to take cholesterol medications, but I don't want to. And once they start you on that regimen and you start getting the sleep that you need, you start seeing things a lot clearer, and you start realizing where some of the shortfalls may be and where you can redirect yourself and maybe have a little bit more optimistic outlook on life and what's going on. So I do take medications, and I will as long as I need to help me stay focused and be less irritable and be more responsible. So the meditation and yoga, meditation is something that my wife and I have actually started doing, sometimes together, sometimes on our own, but it's giving yourself that 5, 10, 15 minutes of calmness, of closing your eyes and taking in your surroundings and where you are and how you feel, and you you feel refreshed even after a short period of time. When I went at the center, every morning you start off with a goal session. So you go over your goals that you're going to do for the day, and then you have a 5 to 15 minute meditation session. And being an Idaho boy and not into any of that stuff, I was really anxious about it and didn't know what to expect. And the thing is that where else in life or your normal busyness of the day do you allow yourself a calm, stress-free environment where you get to reflect on your breathing or your, feeling for the day? It's fairly refreshing. And then the yoga, another time to sit, stretch, be by yourself or with ones you care for, and focus on yourself. Now, this is kind of what I'm going at, is being able to focus on yourself throughout the day and not so much of where you're going to teach next, your shift, what's going on in your email while you're off duty, mowing the lawn. You get to focus on yourself. So here are some quick resources. I want to highlight Dr. Kristen Kishel, and if you're going to write down any numbers, write down hers. She's in downtown Spokane, but she will come to fire departments each shift and do some training. She has one that's called Mental Toughness that she did for us earlier this year or late last fall, and it's just a powerful 2 hours of recognition of what we go through and how she can help. And she's done ride-alongs with fire departments. She's the person that Spokane City, Spokane Valley go to for any of their mental needs. And she's been a great resource for us and a lot of members in our area. And there's the Center of Excellence phone number. The Idaho First Responder Wellness Collaborative was started by a group a couple of years ago, and it's on Facebook, and it's full of a wealth of information. And when mental health trainings are coming up, some stories, and every once in a while there's some really good stuff that comes through. I highly recommend subscribing to it. All right, we're getting close. So we only live once, Snoopy. And Snoopy says, wrong. We only die once. We live every day. I used to start off every training with Carpe Diem, seize the day, live the day to its fullest. And I stopped putting that in my presentations because I wasn't doing it. I wasn't living up to it. I had other alternatives I'd rather do, and it wasn't seizing the day. And so only die once. Let's live every day. I mean, today is supposed to be thunderstorms and rain here a little bit. But I know some of you are down on the river right now and living life to its fullest. So let's do that. And then I saw this on Facebook one day as well. It's a guy standing on the corner of Celtice and Idaho Street with my fire station at the time right behind it. And it's or a reminder that you matter. I don't know who this guy was. I don't know who took the picture, but it was so random and it was so what I needed that day that I saved the picture. You matter. You do. And that's why I'm doing this presentation. That's why it matters a lot to me to be able to share this story and to, like I said earlier, resonate with one of you and maybe make a difference. So with that in mind, you matter. And here's my contact information. If you ever need to get a hold of me, that's my cell. Shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I'm available all the time. I field all sorts of questions and emails all sorts of days and times of the day. But thanks for having me, fools, and share the message and be safe and take care of yourselves.
Adam, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. This was a great time to do this in May with mental health awareness and get some help and have someone locally that has been there and share your story. So thank you for taking time away from your family on Sunday to share with us, and hopefully, like you said, we can get somebody some help if they need it. And we do have resources available, and we can help out. So thanks again, Adam. We do really appreciate your time, sir.
You're welcome.
If any of you guys need help, we do have resources in the email for our members, non-members. If you're a non-member, you could get a hold of us through coifools@gmail.com for the list. Remember, if you text the word badge to 741-741, there's a person in Colorado that can help you out. I tested it personally just to see if it would work in case I ever needed it or I had to share it with crews or anybody. So it does work great. They're very good. It's no big deal. When I did the test, they understood that I was just doing a test, and they gave me a text back later and said, if there's anything you need, just let us know. So it's a good thing to check out, good resource for us. An app that I use is Headspace. Adam had talked about doing some meditation. Headspace works really good at work. It's a free app. You could buy it for the year. I think it's $30 for the year, and it's unlimited, but I just use the free side of it. I do a 10-minute one, maybe at lunchtime at the station in my room. And it just gives you that little bit of a mental break and kind of get some clarity. Like you said, Adam, it's incredible how much meditation works. I hadn't done it before, but one of my engineers had turned me on to it. And I think there was a reason at the time he turned me on to it. I think that he saw that I didn't have the capacity in my mind to take things the way I needed to. They kind of describe the mental capacity as like a suitcase, so to speak. And you start putting things into this suitcase and it gets full, and all of a sudden you can't put anything more in the suitcase. So if you use something like meditation or Headspace or whatever it may be, you start taking things out of the suitcase little by little, and you gain yourself some area. Once you have that area, you can handle things a little different. So there was one day we were coming back from a call. It was really a nothing call, other than it was a care facility, and it was near my grandmother's room that she had passed away in. I didn't really realize that I'd had an issue with it. And on the way back, he just looked at me and he said, "Have you done any Headspace today?" And I realized I need to. I know what you mean. Thank you. And so it was good to have that conversation with your crew members, to be open to saying, hey, we either need to go have some tailboard coffee and talk about some stuff, or we need to do some Headspace, or whatever it is that works for you. Reach out to someone, call your parents, call your spouse. But it's good to get these things taken care of and not to get yourself in a space that you don't want to be in, and just know that there is help out there. There is better days. This life is a long life to live, and bad days, bad weeks, bad years, bad decade. We have a long time to live and things do get better. So reach out, get some help, keep that suitcase freed up, get some headspace or whatever, you find helps. A book that is in the resources that had helped me out is Road Less Traveled. And it just kind of explains that life's tough. And it kind of basically, life is tough. And as soon as you accept that, it's not as tough because it is tough. There's going to be hard days. So that one was good. And we had Stan Cook earlier this year with Growth Mindset. And the book, I believe, that Growth Mindset came from is Mindset. And that's in our list as well for a book. But Mindset kind of gives you an idea and frees up your mind to where when bad things do happen, you have that mental capability because of Growth Mindset to look at it a little different. And Stan Cook's class has really helped me out with the growth mindset and to be able to handle situations better because I view it different. It's a completely different view. So that's a good one. And my wife is really good with me and inspiring me to do better. And it's good to have those relationships because I think that also helps your mindset when you go to work. So to work on your home life and to try to get everything good there trickles over into work, which can make those calls not compound as hard. Everyone's different, but that was a good base for me to start with. So my own mindset and having the support of my wife has been really good. Fit to Fight Fire has a good podcast on all this. Episode number 32 deals with PTSD. It's a great listen. Sometimes maybe that's how you can get some headspace too, is some podcasts, but definitely episode 32 is a good one. So I think you mentioned in the beginning is have a plan in place. I think it's good to have these lists available to you and your family, to have trigger points, talk to your family about trigger points and things that they might start noticing about you and some change, and maybe have some words of, do we need to look into Headspace? In that can be just a trigger for you to go, okay, they're realizing something's going on. I need to get some help. So just have that plan in place, because when you get into feeling depressed, you don't know what to do at that point. And to have kind of a pre-plan, and that's why we came up with this list that the lady you had in Spokane is really helpful. And the reason we did that is Adam mentioned that, going to get help and you get there from the EAP program and maybe it's the wrong help. So then you get turned off from it. So we're trying to work really hard on finding the help. And maybe not all the stuff we come up with is the best for everyone, but we're trying to find good avenues of people that have dealt with first responders, because last thing we want to do is you decide you want to get help, you go and get help, it's the wrong help, and then you just kind of deflect it and don't do it. So hopefully our list is going to be helpful, that we can find the right help for our members and anyone who needs it. So we'll have that list available. My grandfather was in World War II and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And he had mentioned that after World War II, because we were having a discussion about just stress that people have, and he opened up to me a lot and shared some of his stories. But one of them that I was reminded of today was when World War II was over, they got on the boat and they were riding back, and they were in their battalions. They're around the guys that they fought with, and they were able to talk about it all the way home. So they were able to defuse that and have these conversations a lot with guys that really were there and dealt with it. And he said that, you know, he had night terrors his whole life from it. He never, to my knowledge, went and saw a counselor, but his counsel was he would go have coffee once a week with veterans down at the Elks Club. And so he was around like-minded people, peer support, and he was able to have those conversations and once a week get that opened up and talk about it and empty it out. And, you know, for someone that went through so much, I never would have guessed that until he told me the story. So it's good to talk to people and get that out. I did want to mention, you know, Fools recognizes line of duty deaths. I wanted to mention, you know, we do have a list of line of duty deaths that were from COVID-19, and we just want to recognize that as Fools members and never forget that. We also want to put LA Fire in our thoughts and prayers today. They had an explosion yesterday on a fire. Quite the video to watch online, but I just wanted to recognize them and put those guys in our thoughts and prayers right now. I want to shift some gears and talk about our peer support and hanging out and Fools and socializing. And we've got our second due has a symposium in October, the end of October. And it's pretty exciting year this year. We have 2 hot classes, 1 truck class and 1 engine class for hot days. The truck class sold out in 48 hours, so that's pretty exciting. You can still get on the wait list through second due, so go ahead and get on there and get on the wait list just in case someone backs out and goes deer hunting or elk hunting. So the lecture still has a lot of room left in it. We've got a lot of good speakers coming, and we're going to have some tactics on tap Thursday night and Fool's Bash on Saturday night to raise money for Jeff Welsh Fund. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be a good time. And looks like there's 10 spots left in the engine company class with Kevin Shea. So that's going to be a good one. We got some of the guys from Elkhart Brass showing up and helping us out with that. So going to be a good time. If you want your discount, dues paying members for Fools, 15% off, get a hold of us at coifools@gmail.com and we'll get you your 15% off code for that. I wanted to thank 1-800-BOARD-UP for their continued support for us in keeping us going. And they have a new app I downloaded on my phone. If you go on a fire and need help, you just hit the app and they were able to find the location and it was pretty easy to use. So something to think about with 1-800-BOARD-UP. They do respond to all hazards, and you know, they clean a week of clothes for people. They'll put people up in a hotel room, and they do work hand in hand with Red Cross. So if you guys your department works well with Red Cross, so does 1-800-BOARD-UP. So don't forget about 1-800-BOARD-UP. They are a huge supporter of our training for Fools and departments, and we just want to thank them for everything they do. So that's everything I had today. Adam, again, really appreciate your time. Tell your family thank you for their time for us today so we could have you. And God bless all of you. And if there's anything anybody needs, give us an email, coifools@gmail.com. Reach out on Facebook, and we're here to help. So thank you all very much and have a great Sunday. Thanks for spending your time with us. Take care.